Alpha of the most powerful pack in South Korea, had his hands full. Running his global tech empire, his pack duties, and maintaining a centuries-old secret left little room for anything else. He was a man of logic, strategy, and power. His name is Jin. Fairy tales and ancient legends were not part of his world. Until they became his world. A spy, deep within the secretive North Korean pack, risked everything to send a single encrypted report. It spoke of a prophecy of an ancient dormant bloodline known only as the Echo. A mere human whose blood held the unique ability to absorb and amplify a wolf's energy. For a tyrant alpha, it could mean unimaginable power. Power to control not just minds but entire nations. Power to break the delicate balance of their hidden world. The report concluded with a grainy, pixelated image. It was a photo of a young woman, American Korean. Her name was Mina. Jin felt a primal jolt, not of recognition but of urgent, terrifying clarity. The North Korean alpha, a ruthless fanatic, wasn't seeking power for his pack's survival. He sought domination. He intended to breed an alpha with Mina's echo blood, creating a tyrant alpha, a weapon of mass control that could enslave both humans and wolves. The thought sent a cold dread through Jin. If that weapon was unleashed, the world as they knew it would crumble. He knew in that moment his life was about to change. He had to find her before they did. Jin launched a desperate, silent hunt, mobilizing every resource his vast empire commanded. Data analysts sifted through global records. Private investigators followed faint leads. His best trackers worked tirelessly, not with scent on the wind, but through the digital trails of the human world. He needed to be invisible, fast, and utterly relentless. His goal was simple yet daunting. Find Mina. Get her. Keep her close. Keep her safe. No matter the cost. His world and hers depended on it. Chapter 1. Mina stared at the screen, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm against her ribs. The number on the page was so large it looked fake. 3 years of student loans, her mother's ever-growing medical bills, the crushing debt from her small design firm, all of it gone. The contract was a fairy tale, a dream of a life without worry, and all she had to do was click, accept. It was an offer to design a massive luxury estate in Seoul for a mysterious reclusive billionaire. She had been chosen out of hundreds of designers, a fact that both baffled and humbled her. Her style was minimalist, earthy, and focused on comfort. His was, well, she had no idea. He was just a ghost, an email address with an inhuman amount of money. She scrolled down to the bottom of the document, her finger hovering over the digital signature line. The one clause made her stomach clench. The interior designer must live within the estate's walls until the project is complete. It was a strange demand, a ridiculous one even for the wealthy. Felt like a joke. Why would a billionaire want his designer living on site? Was he a control freak? A recluse? Or just plain strange? He didn't know. All she knew was that the money was an obscene, life-changing sum that would solve every problem her family had. She took a deep breath, muttered a prayer, clicked the accept button, and signed her soul away. A week later, she was on a plane to Seoul. Her luggage was filled with design sketches and her head was filled with 1,000 questions. She was picked up at the airport by a sleek black car with darkened windows. The driver, a tall, silent man in an impeccable suit, drove her in silence for over an hour. The city, with its brilliant neon lights and buzzing energy, eventually gave way to a quiet, winding road that led deep into the hills. The estate was a fortress. It was a modern mansion made of glass and steel, with towering walls and a silent, terrifying security system that seemed to hum with power. The guards at the gate were armed and expressionless, their eyes tracking the car as it passed. The air was filled with a low, humming tension that made her skin crawl. She was taken to a luxurious guest wing, an entire apartment that was bigger than her entire home in Los Angeles. The place was beautiful, a perfect monument to wealth, but it was cold and silent. She felt completely alone, a ghost in a gilded cage. She spent the first few days in a daze, exploring the endless rooms and the perfectly manicured grounds. The place was a maze of polished marble and cold, sterile perfection. She felt out of place, a walking contradiction in a home that had no soul. She was starting to get nervous. This was a place, she realized, that was designed to keep people out. But it was also designed to keep something, or someone, in. On the third day, she got a text from a public relations assistant. Mr. Jean will be meeting you on site at 9 a.m. Please have your initial designs ready for review. Mina's heart began to race. She had no idea what he looked like, what he sounded like, or what he wanted. She had no idea what to expect. She had only seen pictures of the exterior, and she had no idea what kind of person would want to live in a place so cold and isolated. She had to remind herself to be professional, to be strong. He was just a client, a very rich one. He could handle this. At 9 a.m. sharp, a man walked into the main hall. He wasn't old or reclusive or strange. He was devastatingly handsome, a man with broad shoulders and athletic build, and a face that could have belonged to a K-drama star. But his eyes were a different story. They were the color of molten gold, and they held an ancient, unyielding power that made the hair on her arms stand on end. He wasn't a man, he was a king. "You must be Mina," he said, his voice a low, commanding rumble that made the air around her feel thick and heavy. "I am Jean." His presence was a wall of cold, silent power. He looked at her not as a human being but as a project. He walked straight to the table where her designs were laid out and began to review them, a silent storm of concentration. He didn't speak. He just looked, his gaze a deep, unsettling intensity that made her feel like a bug under a microscope. He didn't touch the designs, didn't ask a single question. He simply absorbed them, his posture stiff and his face a blank mask. The silence was suffocating. Mina's patience, a thin thread at the best of times, finally snapped. "Excuse me, Mr. Jean," she said, her voice shaking with a mix of frustration and rage. "Is there something you would like to say? We have a lot of work to do. And this project is going to be a disaster if you don't give me any input. I need to know what you want. I need to know what you like. Is that not why I was hired?" She expected to be fired. She had gone too far. She had broken the unspoken rule of the client. But he didn't fire her. He looked up from the designs, a flicker of genuine surprise in his eyes. His gaze was no longer cold and detached, but filled with a new, burning light. A small, humorless smile touched his lips, and for the first time in his life he took a personal interest in a human. "You have a fire in you," he said, his voice a low, appreciative growl. "Good. I want to see more of it. Let's get to work." He walked away, his steps silent and purposeful, leaving Mina alone in the middle of the empty hall, her heart hammering against her ribs. He was shocked. He had not only not fired her, but he seemed pleased. The tension between them had been replaced by a new, more dangerous energy. She had just started a fight with the man who held her future in his hands, and she had no idea that she had just found a silent, dangerous friend in her prison. She had just found a key to her cage, a key with eyes the color of gold. Chapter 2. Mina quickly learned that the opulence of Jin's estate was matched only by the isolation it provided. Her guest wing was a self-contained apartment of polished marble and dark, intimidating furniture. It was magnificent. It was also a prison. Her world shrank to the walls of the mansion, and the only other person in it, aside from the silent staff who seemed to materialize and vanish at will, was Jean himself. And Jean was a constant presence. He would simply appear. He would be there when she came down for breakfast, a solitary figure at a table that could seat 20. He would be there when she was in the main hall unrolling her blueprints. He would just stand there, his hands in his pockets, a shadow of cold, intimidating power. Her initial strategy was to ignore him. She was, after all, a professional. This was her job. She would focus on the work, on the sketches, on the materials. One day she was struggling to get a massive roll of wallpaper off its stand, and she grunted in frustration. She had a mental note to ask one of the silent guards for help later. But before she could even turn around, a single strong hand had wrapped around the roll and lifted it as if it were a child's toy. She looked up and saw Jean. He was looking at her, a silent question in his eyes. "Thank you," she said, bewildered. "You don't have to do that." He didn't reply. He just stood there, the wallpaper roll in his hand, a silent, unmoving statue. The silence stretched between them until Mina, flustered, finally stammered, Wasn't this why I was hired? To do this?" He didn't even crack a smile. He just set the roll down in the exact spot she had been trying to get it and walked away. This became their strange, daily rhythm. She would be struggling with a heavy box of samples, and he would appear and carry it for her. She would be perched precariously on a ladder, and he would silently stand below her, one hand on the rungs, his powerful presence a silent safety net. She was baffled by his behavior. He was a billionaire CEO, a man who ran a global empire. Why was he spending his days acting as her personal assistant? Her internal monologue was working overtime. Is this a test? Is he checking if I'm a professional? Or is this just some kind of rich person hobby I don't know about? Do they have a reality show called Billionaire Alpha's Housemaid that I'm a part of? The truth was she was completely disarmed by his actions. He was so completely at odds with his cold, distant persona. There was no charm, no flirtation. Just this unsettlingly perfect way of knowing exactly what she needed. She would be looking for a specific type of fabric, a rare weave from a small village in Korea that was almost impossible to get. She would spend hours on the phone with suppliers, her frustration growing with every dead end. She'd mention her struggles out loud, thinking she was alone. But the next day a small, discreet package would arrive at her workshop. Inside would be a generous sample of the exact fabric she needed, along with a note from Jin's assistant stating, "The chairman located this for you. Your order has already been placed." It felt less like a client helping her and more like an omniscient power observing her every struggle. A favor that was both thoughtful and deeply unnerving. The tension between them was no longer a clash of wills. It had become a dance of polite distance and an undeniable, unspoken longing. She would find herself more and more drawn to his quiet, lonely presence, baffled and intrigued by his strange, perfect way of knowing exactly what she needed. There was one day she spent hours trying to perfect a design for a light fixture. She had been on a call with a vendor for over an hour, her hands gesturing wildly, her face a mask of frustration. Jean had walked in and stood there silently, and when she finally hung up the phone she let out a long, weary sigh. "Is the structural weight an issue?" he asked, his voice low. Mina blinked, surprised. She hadn't heard him come in. "Yes. The load-bearing walls are here and here. I can't put the weight of the new fixture where I want it." Jean walked over to her blueprints, his gaze a deep, unsettling intensity. He looked at the design, his eyes scanning the numbers and lines with a speed that was impossible. He tapped a single point on the blueprint. "The support should be over there," he said, his voice a quiet command. "It will distribute the load without affecting the rest of the structure." Mina stared at the spot he had pointed to. The idea was so brilliantly simple it made her want to weep. "How did you know that?" she asked, her voice a mix of awe and frustration. He just looked at her, his golden eyes deep and knowing. He didn't answer. He never did. He just walked away, leaving her to stare at the single line on the blueprint, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm against her ribs. It was in these moments that she started to see a different man. Not a king but a shadow. He had an immense power he seemed to hide from the world. He was a man who, despite his immense wealth, seemed profoundly, achingly lonely. She would find him late at night in the dark corners of the hall, staring out into the night, his face a mask of quiet sadness. In those moments she wanted to reach out to him, to ask him what was wrong, to tell him that she understood. But she didn't. She knew he was a stranger and a dangerous one at that. And yet she found herself more and more drawn to him. The days turned into weeks. She was no longer just a prisoner in a cage of gold. She was an accomplice in a strange, silent dance with a man who could command armies but chose to stand in her shadow. She didn't know his secrets. She didn't know his purpose. All she knew was that every time he was near, the air crackled with a silent, possessive energy that made her feel more alive than she ever had. She knew he was a mystery she was not supposed to solve. But with every passing day she found herself wanting to solve it more and more. She felt a pull, a silent, powerful, undeniable pull. It was not a magical, fated mate bond. It was something more human, something she could almost touch. It was the pull of two lonely souls, looking for a home in the most unlikely of places. She had no idea how wrong she was. Chapter 3. Mina stared at the invitation in her hands. A rare night out. Jean had offered to take her out for dinner to celebrate a major milestone in their project. But instead of a quiet, fancy restaurant, he had a surprise for her. He had taken her to the Gwangjang market, one of the oldest and largest traditional markets in Seoul. The moment they stepped out of the car, Mina was hit with a tidal wave of sensations. The air was a chaotic symphony of smells. The sizzling of meat, the sweet aroma of syrup from hotteok pancakes, the pungent, fermented scent of kimchi. The sounds were a cheerful, disorganized chaos of vendors shouting, families laughing, and a low, distant hum of music. It was a complete and total opposite of the silent, sterile world of Jin's estate. The sheer amount of people was overwhelming, but the vibrant energy was infectious. For the first time since she had arrived in Seoul, Mina felt a little bit like herself again. He felt like a person, not a prisoner. She had to admit this was a surprising and deeply thoughtful gesture. Jin, the cold, distant billionaire, had brought her to a place so full of life and chaos it felt like he was a completely different person. And in a way he was. Here, in the midst of 100,000 human distractions, Jin seemed to relax. He wasn't a silent, imposing shadow. He was a curious, quiet man who was watching the world with a sense of wonder. His golden eyes were alive with a quiet light she had never seen before. He bought her a plate of small, delicious dumplings and watched her eat them, a rare, genuine smile on his face. She felt herself drawn to him, the tension between them dissolving into something that felt a little bit like a real, comfortable date. "Is it what you expected?" he asked, his voice a low rumble. Mina laughed. "I expected a steak dinner in a silent, perfectly lit room. This is so much better." She gestured to the crowds, her mouth filled with food. "It's like the real Seoul. It's perfect." He just nodded, but his eyes never stopped moving. They were constantly scanning the crowd, watching the faces, listening to the conversations as if he were looking for something. She thought it was just a habit, a sign of his immense wealth and power. He thought he was just being careful. She had no idea that he was doing exactly what a wolf would do. He was searching for danger. They walked deeper into the market, a silent, comfortable space between them. Mina was a whirlwind of sensory overload, but Jin was a quiet anchor, a calm presence in the middle of a beautiful human storm. She felt a profound sense of peace with him. She felt safe. And for the first time she thought that maybe, just maybe, this cold, distant man was not a prison but a home. But the peace was a fragile thing. It happened in an instant. Jin was standing beside her as she haggled with a vendor over a small, brightly colored fan. He was so close that she could feel the heat radiating from his body. And then, in a single gut-wrenching moment, his body went perfectly rigid. The scent of him, once so clean and woodsy, suddenly changed. It became cold and sharp, like the smell of ozone before a storm. The low, pleasant thrum of his energy vanished, replaced by a deep, terrifying silence. His hand shot out and wrapped around her arm, his grip hard and possessive. He pulled her close, his body a silent, powerful shield. He bent his head, his face a mask of cold, controlled fury. His eyes were no longer golden. They were a piercing, feral yellow. "What's wrong?" Mina whispered, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm against her ribs. "Jin." He didn't answer. He just tightened his grip on her arm and began to move. He was a silent bulldozer, a force of nature moving through the crowds. People instinctively parted for him, shying away from the cold, menacing energy that radiated from his body. Mina was a helpless passenger pulled along in his wake. The scent was what hit her next. She couldn't smell it at first, but now a low, cold odor began to creep into her senses. It was a smell like rusted iron and old leaves, a scent that felt wrong, a scent that smelled like fear and danger. She didn't know where it was coming from, but she felt a low, humming dread in the pit of her stomach. It wasn't her own fear. It was Jin's. It was a cold, alien fear that she felt through his hand, a feeling of deep, bone-chilling terror that made her blood run cold. She didn't know what it was. All she knew was that it was coming for them. He moved with an inhuman speed, pulling her through the crowd. He was a man on a mission, a hunter on a trail. He was a king in a silent war. He got them to the edge of the market, to the deserted alleyway where his car was waiting. He pushed her into the back seat, his movements quick and urgent. He jumped in after her and the car sped away, leaving the vibrant, chaotic market behind. The air in the car was thick with unsaid things. Mina stared at his face. His expression was a storm of 100 different emotions. Rage, fear, sorrow, and something that looked a little bit like desperation. He was staring out the window, his jaw clenched, his body still rigid with tension. She didn't know what was happening. She didn't know what she had just experienced. All she knew was that a silent, terrifying shadow had just passed through their world, and Jean was afraid. And for the first time she wasn't just a guest in a gilded cage. She was a silent partner in a world she didn't understand. A dangerous, frightening, and deadly world. Chapter 4. The air in the car was thick with unsaid things. Mina stared out the window, watching the city lights blur into a stream of color. The scent of ozone from the market had vanished, replaced by the scent of Jean, a deep, earthy smell that was both comforting and terrifying. He was silent, his jaw still clenched, his hands gripping the steering wheel. She felt a low hum of fear, a remnant of his terror, still pulsing in her veins. She had 1,000 questions, but she didn't know how to ask a single one of them. He took her to his private penthouse, a place she hadn't seen before. It was a place that felt more like a throne room than a home. It was filled with glass, steel, and a breathtaking view of the city below. The view was a distraction, a perfect backdrop to the impossible conversation that was about to happen. He led her to a large, comfortable couch and sat her down. He didn't sit with her. He stood, his back to her, looking out at the sprawling city. His body was tense, rigid with an emotion she couldn't name. Felt a little bit like rage and a lot like sorrow. "You're not going to like what I'm about to tell you," he said, his voice a low, gravelly rumble. Mina just nodded. "I'm ready," she said, her voice small. He turned to face her. His golden eyes were no longer cold or distant. They were filled with a profound sadness. "I'm a werewolf, Mina," he said, the words simple and direct. "I'm the alpha of the most powerful pack in South Korea." Mina blinked. He wanted to laugh. He wanted to tell him he was crazy. But she looked at his eyes, at the impossible ancient power she had seen in the marketplace, and she knew he was telling the truth. The humming fear in her stomach, the silent, terrifying energy he radiated, it all made a chilling, horrifying kind of sense. He began to tell her everything. He told her about his pack, a secret society of wolves that controlled the business and political world of Seoul. He told her about their ancient traditions, their deep-rooted secrets, and their silent, constant war. He told her about the North Korean pack, a group of fanatics who wanted to use a powerful, mythical weapon to dominate the world. He told her about her. "You have a dormant bloodline, a rare human lineage called the Echo. Your blood has the unique ability to absorb and amplify a wolf's energy. The North Korean Alpha, he found you. He wants to use you to create a tyrant alpha, a weapon that could enslave both humans and wolves." He looked at her, his face a mask of solemn apology. "I didn't hire you for your talent. I hired you to keep you close. To protect you. To hide you in plain sight. I bought you." The last words hit her with the force of a physical blow. She looked at him, at his cold, empty face, and a powerful wave of betrayal and pain washed over her. She stood up, her body trembling with a fresh wave of rage. "You what?" she said, her voice barely a whisper. "You bought me? I'm not a thing, Jean. I am not a project. I trusted you. You lied to me." He flinched, his body recoiling as if she had struck him. "I know," he said, his voice broken. "I know I did. But I had to. I had no choice. You were in danger. You still are." The look in his eyes was so full of genuine remorse that Mina's rage gave way to a powerful wave of confusion. She had seen him angry, but she had never seen him so vulnerable. He was a king who had just confessed to a crime, a powerful alpha who was a terrified, lonely man. He took a step toward her, his eyes filled with a new, burning light. "I know this is insane. I know you have every right to hate me. But I have to tell you this. I can't keep it a secret anymore." He reached out and took her hands, his touch warm and firm. "I didn't mean to fall for you. My only goal was to keep you safe. But every day, every time you looked at me, every time you made me laugh, every time you defied me, I fell. I fell for you, Mina. I love you." The confession, so raw and so real, made her heart stop. She looked at him, at the quiet vulnerability in his eyes, at the man who had just confessed to a lie and a terrible secret, and she knew he was telling the truth. The love he had for her was a powerful, beautiful thing that had grown in the corners of her mind. She looked into his eyes, and a profound, overwhelming sense of understanding washed over her. She saw not a liar but a protector. She saw not a king but a man who had sacrificed his own peace for her safety. "I love you too," she whispered, the words coming out as a sob. She didn't know if she was crying from fear or from joy, but she knew in that moment that she had found a love she never knew existed. He smiled, a beautiful, heartbreakingly genuine thing that lit up his entire face. He took her in his arms, his body trembling with relief. "I will never let anyone hurt you," he promised, his voice choked with emotion. "I will protect you with my life." He held her for a long time, the only sound the quiet, rhythmic thrum of his heart. He felt safe. He felt loved. He felt like she was home. But the peace was a fragile thing. He suddenly pulled away, his body tense with a new urgency. "I have to leave," he said, his voice raw. "I have an urgent business trip, a pack matter that can't wait." Mina's heart sank. She looked at him, at the man who had just confessed his love and his impossible secret, and she felt a wave of cold dread wash over her. "You're leaving? Now?" He nodded, his eyes filled with a profound sorrow. "I have to. It's a matter of life and death. But I will be back. I promise. My pack, my people, they will protect you while I'm gone. I'll make sure of it." He took her in his arms, his kiss a powerful, desperate final goodbye. He held her for a long time, his body shaking with a profound emotion she couldn't name. He then pulled away, a single silent tear streaming down his face, and walked away, leaving Mina alone in the middle of the empty, silent penthouse. She had 1,000 questions, a head full of impossible truths, and a heart filled with a love that was both a blessing and a terrifying curse. She was left alone with his promise to protect her, a promise that felt as fragile as her own heart. Chapter 5. Mina woke up alone in the opulent guest wing of the estate, feeling a strange mix of sadness and a fragile newfound hope. Jean had left in the dead of the night, a silent goodbye that still ached in her heart. His confession was a surreal memory, a conversation so intense it felt like a dream. She was a human who had just been told that the man she loved was a werewolf. It was a truth so insane she almost wanted to laugh. But the words he had spoken, the raw vulnerability in his voice, felt more real than anything else she had ever known. She went to the kitchen and made herself a cup of green tea. The estate was still and silent, a quiet monument to a world she was not a part of. The lack of noise, the absence of Jin's constant silent presence, made the place feel empty and cold. She sat at a large, perfectly polished table, sipping her tea, scrolling through her phone, a quiet hum of sadness in her heart. She was a human who was now in love with an alpha, a man who had confessed his love and then had left for a remote location where his pack was in danger. It was a reality so bizarre, so fantastical it felt like a sick joke. She spent the morning working on her designs, her mind a million miles away. She was thinking about Jean, about his confession, about his promise to protect her. He trusted him. He trusted his pack. The security on the estate was like something out of a spy movie, a high-tech fortress that would make any normal person feel safe. She felt safe. She felt like she was a part of something big, something powerful, something that was willing to protect her. She had no idea that her safety was as fragile as a pane of glass. The alarm was the only warning. The silence of the estate was shattered by a loud, high-pitched wail that seemed to come from every wall, from every corner of the house. The sound was a jarring, terrifying invasion of the quiet peace she had become so accustomed to. The lights flickered and then died, plunging the mansion into a deep, consuming darkness. The air was no longer a silent, pleasant thing. It was filled with a low, menacing growl that came from everywhere and nowhere all at once. The humming tension that had always been present at the estate was gone, replaced by a cold, primal terror. Mina's heart pounded a frantic rhythm against her ribs. She was alone. She fumbled for her phone, but there was no signal. The security system was offline. She ran for the main hall, her mind a frantic blur of panic and questions. She heard the sound of glass shattering, the loud, sickening crash of a broken window. She heard the sound of men shouting, the sound of a wolf's growl that was filled with a cold, hungry malevolence. He saw them. They were like ghosts in the darkness, a group of dark, menacing figures that were moving with a terrifying, silent speed. They were men, but they moved like animals, their bodies sleek and powerful. They had guns, but they were not firing. They were not here to kill. They were here for her. The growling came from the wolves that were with them, a group of powerful, menacing animals whose eyes glowed with a feral, demonic light. They were not looking for a fight. They were looking for her. The silence was their weapon, and the darkness was their ally. The security guards were there, but they were helpless. The fight was a chaotic blur of motion and violence. She heard the sound of bones snapping, the muffled cry of a man, the deep, guttural growl of a wolf. The guards were no match for the silent, efficient brutality of the attackers. They were like a swarm of angry hornets, a force of nature that was moving with a single unified purpose. Mina ran, her heart pounding against her ribs, her mind a frantic blur of panic and terror. She ran for the guest wing, for the safety of her room, for the promise that Jean had made. She was a human, a helpless, fragile thing caught in a world of violence and rage. She knew she was in danger. She knew she was going to die. She screamed for Jean, a desperate final cry that she knew would go unanswered. The scream was the only sound she made. A large, powerful hand wrapped around her arm, a cold iron grip that made her blood run cold. She was pulled backward, her body slammed against a hard, powerful chest. The scent of him was cold and metallic like old blood and rust. She looked up and she saw him. He was not a wolf but a man with a face that was cold and cruel. His eyes were the color of ice, and they were filled with a hatred that was so powerful it was terrifying. "I have you now, Echo," he snarled, his voice a low, gravelly rumble. "Your king is not here to save you." She screamed again, a desperate cry that was swallowed by the chaos of the night. She struggled, her body a frantic, helpless blur of motion. But his grip was too strong. He was an alpha. He was just a human. He began to pull her away toward the sound of a waiting car, and she knew she was lost. The last thing she saw was the dark, empty space where Jean was supposed to be. The promise of his love, the hope of a future, the belief that she was safe. It all came crashing down in a single devastating moment. The hope turned into pure, cold devastation, and the silence that followed was the silence of a grave. He was taken. The silence was absolute. Chapter 6. Mina was pulled into the back of a black van, her mind a frantic, desperate blur of panic and terror. The guards who had ambushed her were silent, their bodies rigid and cold. He was no longer a person, she was a tool. The van drove for hours, the journey a jarring, disorienting blur of motion. She was taken across the border, through a series of checkpoints that seemed to appear out of nowhere. The world was a strange, terrifying place, a place of silent sentries and menacing stares. She was taken to a dark, remote facility, a place that felt more like a dungeon than a home. The air was cold and damp, and the silence was a heavy, suffocating thing. She was led to a large, empty room, and she saw him. He was a man with a face that was cold and cruel. His eyes were the color of ice, and they were filled with a hatred that was so powerful it was terrifying. He was the North Korean alpha. He was not a king but a fanatic. He did not speak to her. He just looked at her, a silent, menacing stare. He pointed to a large black chair and she was pushed into it, her body slammed against the hard, cold metal. Her hands and feet were strapped to the arms and legs of the chair, and her body was held fast by a series of restraints. She was a helpless, fragile thing, a pawn in a game she didn't understand. She screamed, but the scream was swallowed by the thick walls of the room. She was alone. The ritual began. The alpha stood before her, his eyes filled with a cold, triumphant light. He began to chant, a low, guttural chant that made the air in the room hum with an otherworldly power. She felt it immediately, a cold, sharp energy that began to invade her mind. It was a psychic invasion, a malevolent force that was trying to break her will. He was trying to corrupt her echo power, to turn her blood into a weapon, a source of power that he could use to dominate the world. Mina's mind was a battlefield. She was fighting, but she was losing. The alpha was a force of nature, a powerful, evil being who was trying to break her. She felt his power, a cold, dark presence that was trying to invade her soul. He was showing her images of chaos, of destruction, of death. He was trying to poison her mind with his hatred, to turn her love for the world into a weapon of destruction. He was on the verge of giving up. Her mind was a frantic blur of confusion and despair. The promises Jean had made, the love she had for him, it was all slipping away. The images of Jin's smiling face, the sound of his low, commanding voice, the feeling of his protective hand on her arm, it was all fading into a distant, beautiful memory. She was alone. She was helpless. She was going to die. And then she felt it. A single, bright light in the darkness. It was a feeling of pure, unadulterated love, a powerful, warm current that was trying to reach her through the mental noise. It was a feeling she knew, a feeling she had felt in the back of a car, on the rooftop of a penthouse, in the silence of an empty hall. It was Jean. He was there. Not in the room but in her mind. His love was a beacon, a lifeline, a silent, powerful scream that was telling her to hold on. He had just returned from his trip. He was in the car on his way to the facility, but he was already with her. His rage was a fire, his desperation was a weapon. He was a man on a mission and he was fighting for his life, for her life. He was a king in a silent war and he was fighting his way to her. The North Korean alpha felt it too. He paused, his chanting ceasing, his eyes narrowing in confusion. "A foreign presence," he snarled, his voice a low growl. "He is trying to reach her." He was angry. He was furious. He knew that their bond was strong, but he had underestimated it. He was a fanatic, a man who believed in the power of hatred, of dominance, of control. He didn't understand the power of love. He began to chant again, his voice now a loud, furious roar. He was trying to overwhelm Jin's presence, to extinguish his light, to poison her mind with his darkness. But it was too late. Jin's love was a fire, a powerful, unyielding force that was fighting for her. Mina, anchored by Jin's love, found a renewed will to fight. She closed her eyes and focused on the light. She focused on the warmth, on the love, on the man who was fighting for her. She was no longer helpless. He was a fighter. He was a partner. He was a force of nature. Chapter 7. The sound of a powerful engine screaming down the long, empty road was the only warning. Jin had driven with a fury she had never seen before. He was a man possessed, a force of nature. He was not just a king but a hunter, and the prey was his. He had heard her scream, he had felt her terror, and the memory was a fire in his soul. He burst through the doors of the facility, his pack a blur of motion behind him. They were a force of nature, a group of alphas fighting with a silent, terrifying purpose. They were not fighting for a cause, they were fighting for their mate. The battle was a chaotic blur of sound and motion, but Jin's eyes were only on one thing. Her. The ritual had succeeded. She was standing in the middle of the room, her eyes wide with fear, a creature of pure raw energy. Her body was surrounded by a glowing ethereal light. Her echo power had been unleashed, a power she could not contain. The room was a mess of shattered glass and broken metal, a testament to the power that was consuming her. The North Korean alpha was standing before her, his hands raised, his eyes filled with a triumphant, cold light. He was winning. He was about to turn her into a weapon. The battle was fierce, but the real fight was inside Mina. She was losing control. Her mind was a battlefield of light and darkness. The North Korean alpha's power was a cold, malevolent force, and Jin's love was a warm, powerful beacon. She was a creature of pure chaos, a being with unimaginable power, but she was losing control. She was on the verge of turning evil. But Jin would not let that happen. He pushed through the chaos, through the snarling wolves and the armed men, his body a silent, lethal weapon. He was not fighting. He was a man with a single purpose. He burst into the room and his eyes locked with hers. He saw the terror in her eyes, the raw, beautiful light that was about to be extinguished. He saw her not as a weapon but as a woman, as his mate. He got to her and he grabbed her hand, a desperate, final act. His touch was a shock of warm, pure energy that shot through her body, a beacon of light in the darkness. He held her tight, his hand a firm, unyielding anchor. He poured his love into her, a loving, powerful stream of warmth. He reminded her of the quiet moments they shared, the trust they built, and the confession he made. His love was her anchor. He reminded her of who she was. The battle inside her raged on. The North Korean alpha was furious. He was losing control. He was losing his weapon. "She is mine," he roared, his voice filled with a desperate, furious rage. "You cannot save her. He is a weapon. A creature of chaos. She is mine." But he was wrong. He was not a weapon. He was a person. Mina, anchored by his love, found a final moment of clarity. She looked at him, at the man who had risked everything to save her, and she found a profound, unyielding strength. She was not a pawn in a game. He was a partner. She was a queen. She looked at the North Korean alpha, and with a voice that was strong and clear, she told him the truth. "I am not a weapon," she said, her voice a low, powerful command. "I am a person. I am a woman. And I am his." She raised her hands, and her echo power, a chaotic raw force, was now a beautiful, controlled stream of energy. She used her power not to destroy, but to contain the North Korean alpha's energy, rendering him powerless. The powerful, malevolent force was now a small, weak flicker in the air. With her help, Jean defeats the North Korean pack, ending their threat forever. The battle was over. The silence was a thick, heavy blanket that settled over the room. Jean stood over her, his body trembling, his eyes filled with a powerful, emotional light. He looked at her, at the woman who had just saved his life, his pack, and his world. He took her in his arms, his body shaking with a profound emotion she couldn't name. He held her for a long time, the only sound the quiet, rhythmic thrum of his heart. She had done it. She had saved him. She had saved herself. She had found a home. She was no longer just a human. She was a queen. And he was her king. Chapter 8. The silence that followed the final confrontation was a heavy, suffocating thing. The air was thick with the scent of fear, and the ground was littered with the bodies of the North Korean pack. Jean stood over her, his body trembling, his eyes filled with a powerful, emotional light. He looked at her, at the woman who had just saved his life, his pack, and his world. He took her in his arms, his body shaking with a profound emotion she couldn't name. He held her for a long time, the only sound the quiet, rhythmic thrum of his heart. She had done it. She had saved him. She had saved herself. She had found a home. She was no longer just a human. She was a queen. And he was her king. The immediate aftermath was a blur of motion. Jean and his pack, weary and bruised, worked tirelessly. The dead were honored and the injured were tended to. Mina, guided by an instinct she didn't know she had, began to move. Her hands, once small and powerless, were now filled with a warm, loving energy. Her unique blood, the echo that was supposed to be a weapon, was now a source of healing and strength. She moved among the injured, her hands glowing with a soft, ethereal light. She touched a wounded wolf, a deep, ugly gash on his side, and the wound began to close, the skin knitting itself back together with an astonishing speed. She was a healer. She was a gift. She was a miracle. The pack, who had once seen her as a liability, now looked at her with a profound, unyielding respect. She was not a tool. She was not a weakness. She was a partner. She was their alpha's mate, and she was a force of nature. The long journey back to Seoul was a quiet, intimate thing. Jean and Mina were side by side, their hands clasped, their silence a powerful testament to their shared trauma. They didn't speak. They didn't need to. They were two broken souls who had found healing in each other's touch. They were two people who had faced the darkness and had found their way back to the light. They were home. The months that followed were a journey of healing and rediscovery. Mina spent her days in the quiet sanctity of her studio, but she was no longer alone. Jean was there. He was a silent presence, a constant support, a man who had learned that true power was not in his strength but in his love. He was a man who had faced the darkness and had chosen to walk in the light. He was no longer the cold, detached billionaire. He was a man who knew that love was the greatest power of all. Their lives were quiet, but their love was stronger than ever. She was a partner in his empire, a silent advisor who guided him with a wisdom that was all her own. Her unique blood, a source of danger and fear, was now a source of healing and strength for her pack. Jean, for his part, was a changed man. He was a leader who led with a new kind of power, the power of love. He was a man who was no longer alone. Their story became a legend, a whispered tale of the American Korean woman with the echo blood who had tamed the alpha of South Korea and had helped him defeat a tyrant. Their love was a symbol of hope, a testament to the fact that love is not a weakness, but a force that can change the world. I hope you enjoyed the story. I want to hear from you. What was your best moment between Jean and Mina, and who were you rooting for? Let me know in the comments below. If you enjoyed this story, be sure to hit that like button and subscribe for more werewolf romance fantasy videos. Thanks for watching.